Good day, everyone. I'm very pleased today to welcome Gabriel Avigdor from datalex, from the Swiss Federation jurisdiction. We are talking about decentralized clinical trials. So, Gabriel, can you explain to us what is DCT?
Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to discuss with you in this espresso again. So a decentralized clinical trial basically consists in having research activities conducted with a sponsor, usually a pharmaceutical company, with an investigator in the hospital, conducted remotely. So basically it means that you want to conduct research with remote means and technologies. The second aspect of a decentralized clinical trials is that a centralized point of care or a point of research at the site is decentralized because some research can be done with only one principal investigator that can coordinate with other sites, so physical hospitals. So decentralized, it means remotely, and secondly as well with the use of a coordinator.
Excellent. And which are, in your opinion, the challenges, but also the opportunities of DCT?
We'll start with maybe the opportunities and then discuss a bit the challenges. So the opportunities we've seen using a lot of means, digital means to conduct elements, including research remotely with telemedicine technologies in order to obtain personal information that can be sensitive, in order to treat, in order to find new medicines, has been accelerated with the pandemic, obviously, and some guidance has been issued already in that space because of the COVID-19 situation. So the opportunities is to make this happening remotely at the home of a patient or in conjunction with on-site visits. The challenges obviously are quite global today with personal information, not only because we have data that flows outside of the country, but also because we have very sensitive data in the EU. This is something that with the use of technologies has become very difficult because you need to assess the roles of the parties, who is the data controller, who is the data processor, who collects information of patients, which in the context of clinical trials with the good clinical practices, GCPs, sponsors are prohibited to collect because there is a general prohibition from the ICH GCPs generally to collect or to even allow someone else to collect on your behalf patient information. So there are a lot of difficulties to overcome data transfers. You can still use SCCs and conduct transfer impact assessment in order to ensure the flow of data. But there are a lot of challenges with cross-border data transfers, encryption, cybersecurity, and obviously the trust and the explanation of this very new model to ethics committees, authorities, and hospitals, in addition to convince patients to be recruited for those trials. So those are some of the privacy challenges, but there are also as well so many regulatory challenges in that space.
Absolutely. Thank you for summarizing this very clearly. A recent guidance has been issued in this regard. So can you explain to us what it is about?
Yes, so with the pandemic, there has already been some guidance at the EU level, for example, on the fact of obtaining information for research during the pandemic. This has been conducted in an urgent mode to accelerate the research for the vaccine and giving some exceptions in order to be more flexible. And just to say this, guidance on COVID-19 is going to disappear over the next weeks, which is one of the challenges. So the exceptions are going to be less and less used and be applicable, which is then going to be back to some normal rules and is going to be more difficult while the authorities are providing guidance. I will mention 3 or 4 guidances. Globally, the FDA has provided some guidance on DHT, digital health technologies, which will regulate the security, the retrieval of information of PHI, mentioning as well the HIPAA in the US and other regulatory aspect of informed consent using these technologies. This is a very useful guidance. Secondly, we have the Danish Health Authority, which has issued guidance on DCT, which is a quite long document and a very, very short paragraph on privacy, it's referring to the general rule of data protection. We also have at the European level some guidance that has been issued, and it's going to be reviewed in the next coming month in order to see whether this revision on remote capabilities in the context of clinical trials can incorporate some of these aspects. And finally, we have the Swissmedic DCT position paper that we would like to discuss a bit in this espresso. That is quite recent, also end of last year.
Wonderful. So can you explain to us Switzerland positioning in this global framework?
Yes, so in a very practical manner, as usual, the Swiss Federal Therapeutic Agency, together with Swiss Ethics, have issued a position paper on these DCT, giving some very useful tips referring to how electronic consent can be collected lawfully in Switzerland. And I believe this guidance is one of the strictest that I've seen so far, and I will explain why. On e-consent, which is one of the foundation of clinical research, you need to have an informed consent form to participate in a clinical trial, to be signed physically. So you need a wet signature. To allow a signature not to be electronic, you need not to have an advanced signature, but a qualified signature, which is the strongest certification and mechanism you need to have an electronic signature, which will render electronic signature through digital technology is almost impossible unless a patient already has opted to have a digital signature with a certified body. This is the first challenge that I see. The next challenges relating particularly to data privacy is that you need a specific consent for data processing, which usually is one of the hurdle and the difficulty that we have in practice, because usually under the GDPR, you do not need consent, even for sensitive data in the context of a trial, because this consent, it's not freely given, because if they say no to the processing, they have to withdraw from the study. This means that in Europe, under the GDPR, and potentially we can argue this in Switzerland, we should not ask consent for privacy in addition to consent to participate in a trial. So this makes it twice difficult to have two consents specifically, and you may even think of having another consent for potentially data transfers, which is going to be also a very difficult thing to achieve. Finally, one of the very difficulty that the Swiss guidance has posed is to say that the storage and the hosting of information in the context of the trial needs to be in Switzerland or in an adequate country, which to me seems almost impossible to achieve as well, because you may potentially use systems and sub-processors that may be located, or even with having servers located in the EU, but are potentially with affiliates in the US subject to FISA 702, which means that potentially you will have to be this framework and the technologies not be usable. Those challenges may be revised after discussions, probably with the industry and investigator sectors that I would like to explain to you here.
So thank you, Gabriel. Could you tell us how do you see the evolution of these fields, and which kind of concrete tips you could give briefly to our audience?
Yes, sure. I see a lot of localization questions. First of all, in terms of guidance, there's going to be probably some disharmony between guidance between authorities and also authorities that are not specialists in data protection. I will see also some localization of personal data requirements, which is something that I do not believe is the solution, but we see this as a tension also in the market and trying to have the sovereignty of data. I also see that some providers should look into being compliant with Schrems 2 solution to offer this to bring trust to hospitals, patients, sponsors, in order for these questions from a data protection perspective to be addressed. And I see also some difficulties or some hurdles with the costs of this solution that we may not see today if these are sufficiently profitable because of public health requirement. I also see some opportunities if you look into this at the very first stage, bringing together everyone to think of a solution that will work and that will be accepted and adopted in this kind of big project with technologies.
Gabriel Avigdor from datalex in Switzerland, thank you very much for being with us for this Privacy Espresso.
Thank you. See you soon.